Time for perspective on the programme. And France has spent the last 3 months coping with the Yellow Vest protest movement here, of course. Some supporting the protest, perhaps joining in or at least offering some moral support. Others, at least, were watching reports on the latest on the nightly news here. And others, if they've been unlucky, cleaning up after some of the violence on the sidelines of the demonstrations. Now, one of the main issues that's caused so much anger is the difference between the rich and poor. Many of the protesters arguing for changes in tax to help out those, particularly in rural areas, coping on very low wages and relatively high taxes here. But are those criticisms really founded? Is there a real reason why the situation suddenly exploded? Well, to discuss that, I'm joined by Zsolt Darvas. He's an international economics and banking expert, senior fellow at the Bruegel Institute, the Brussels-based economic think tank. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme. I suppose the first thing to do is to challenge that assumption, isn't it? I mean, have the rich here in France and across Europe been getting richer while the poor have been getting poorer?
Now, first of all, we have to discriminate between two types of inequality. One is inequality of effort. For example, if someone studies very hard and works very hard and becomes rich, I think that's not a problem. But the other is inequality of opportunity. When, poorer people doesn't have the opportunity to have good quality education and then good quality jobs, then inequality in a society becomes much weaker. And governments have a major role in supporting the poorer people, providing them better opportunities, for example, with education, and certainly and also with taxation, that's also very important. And certainly one of the triggers for the Yellow Vest movement was the fuel tax, which has a disproportionate impact on the poor. So to some extent, it's not surprising that people went to the streets to demonstrate.
Do you think, though, that the poor have had a pretty tough time of it?
Well, again, poor in Europe are still much richer than poor in elsewhere in the world, but also we can look at countries like Romania or Bulgaria. But the problem is that if the poor doesn't have good opportunities to learn and to reach a higher status in the society, to get better jobs, better income, and on the top of that, the government doesn't want to help the poor with taxation. Also, some of the recent French taxation measures were more favoring the rich than the poor. Then I think that's a big problem, and the government has a major responsibility to correct this situation.
So it is tax, then, you think, then the answer that needs to be sorted out and needs to be changed here in France?
I mean, one issue is certainly tax. The other is education. Healthcare is also important, though I have to say that the French healthcare system is among the best and also one of the most accessible to all. But certainly tax is a very prominent and very important issue, and the governments can do a lot. But immediately I have to add that tax issues are not only national, but also require at least a European-wide coordination. Because if, for example, the French government would increase the tax rate of the rich people, then rich people could go to Belgium, to Germany, or elsewhere in Europe. So there has to be some coordination of tax policies across Europe. Otherwise, tax competition will drive down tax rates, and the rich people always find ways to escape and to find a jurisdiction where they can pay lower taxes.
So it sounds like from what you're saying that you can see that the Yellow Vest protesters, even if you don't necessarily agree with them, but you can see that they do have issues that they can complain about.
Yes, I mean, I think there are some points which are valid, which are made by this movement, and I mean it has to be taken seriously.
And what about the rich? I mean, have they been getting richer? I mean, I've lived here in Paris for about 8 years now, and the price, for example, of apartments is just going up and up and up and up all the time.
Indeed, that's another problem that, I mean, rich people, once they become rich, also their children will very likely become rich. Because, I mean, inheritance taxes are typically very low across Europe. And if someone is born in a rich family, that person will inherit the the apartments in Paris and also the other properties elsewhere, pay very little after that. On top of that, they their families have much better opportunities in supporting them to obtain very good quality education. While if someone comes from a poor family, let's say from the countryside, then certainly the chances of buying an apartment in Paris is very close to zero. If they want to work in Paris or other major cities, they have to rent, but rental prices also grow up simultaneously with housing prices, so rental prices are very, very high. Again, all of these problems undermine the opportunities of poorer people coming from poorer families or rural areas, and again, here is also a scope for the government to act.
And I know there's quite a difference, isn't there, as well, depending which part, if you like, of Europe you're talking about here. I mean, particularly some of the Eastern European countries, some of the newer countries that have joined the European Union, they've actually seen that the poor get a lot closer to the rich over the last few years as their economies have developed.
Central Europe had different types of development. I mean, first of all, when they left communism in the late 80s, early 90s, then there was a very rapid increase in income inequality because in the communist systems, most people had similar incomes. But since then, I mean, these countries are developing closer to the European average. So on average, everybody is getting richer, which is a good development. If you look at within countries, the situation is more or less stable, so that we don't see much increases in income inequality across the more recent members of the European Union.
And just very briefly, if you can, Brexit, of course, on the horizon. Is that going to upset the apple cart?
Well, I mean, Brexit might have, first it has to happen. I mean, we still don't know what will happen in about a month from now. But if it will happen, I mean, it will have some impacts on Europe. Certainly, it also depends a lot on whether there will be a withdrawal agreement, a comprehensive agreement. If not, whether there will be at least some transitory agreement to impact the shock. But overall, my expectation is that continental Europe would be able to get over the British shock, and I think it wouldn't influence that much social and economic developments in continental Europe.
Zsolt Darvas, thanks very much for being with us today. Zsolt Darvas from the Brussels-based economic think tank, the Bruegel Institute. Thanks very much.